My guest this morning is Professor of Economics at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. He has published widely on infrastructure, illicit financial flows, institutions, and human development. Much of his works can be accessed on the links that I'm going to paste in the description panel on the upload for this video. Professor Melvin Ayogu, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Anotida. I'm very excited to join you.
I'm glad to have you on this series, which will focus on finance, economic planning, and policy issues in Africa for probably the next couple of months. As you may know, the prospects of growth and development on the continent are somewhat in danger of faltering due to the impact of global uncertainty, if we can say, depressed commodity prices, and overall the weakly performing economies. The COVID-19 pandemic is one of the factors that have provided some very big lessons for the global economy at large and our continent, Africa in particular. From January last year, commodity price volatility and global uncertainty are giving rise to a fresh bout of what we can call Afro-pessimism about our growth and development. And to change this narrative, more importantly, it is important for us to have a discussion with policymakers to urgently answer some of the key and critical questions to propel development and recovery of our economies in this post-COVID-19 era. How can we ensure steady financing for our significant needs for sustainable development in an increasingly uncertain global environment?
Thank you very much. I will try to offer my opinion. I don't have all the answers, and nobody does.
Sure thing.
This is what makes development economics a very interesting field. It's a field that calls for humility, because development is a big elephant. You sometimes see it only from your perspective, but it's got so many turns and twists and players involved. Of course, the fact that it's a very complex endeavor dictates care and perseverance. There is no formula for ensuring persistent financing because we always need money. It's never enough. And I've always tried to make it clear when I have discussion on development financing that it's not about how much money, it's about how efficient you use what you have.
Exactly.
Even those who have money and those who give to us out of commitment or support would always tell you that you want to do more with less. It's not about more money and more money and more money. It's about what can we achieve with what we have. If you look at the record of spending priorities and efficiency, it leaves much to be desired. In fact, as Professor Ndikumana had alerted, it's almost like making clear what is obvious to us, that Africa is a net creditor to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
We are not a poor continent. You may want to use the word mismanaged or dysfunctional sometimes, but never poor. We're not a poor continent. We've got more resources than any other contiguous piece of real estate in this world that I can think about. There is no type of mineral that is not in Africa. We're very strategic. That is why everybody's interested in Africa. The question is, how do we leverage the resources we have? How have we leveraged the resources we have? Even the developmental flow that has come in the past, it's been full of controversies. Some think it's dead end. Some people think it's just a revolving door. It comes in and it goes out to international banks overseas. We don't use it efficiently. Even the ones we use, the spending priorities. So we've never had to sit down and count the miles. We are always running. And nobody's ever asked, how well have we run in the past? How do we change the trajectory of this course? How do we change the technology of how we run? Even the borrowing. How do we borrow in a transparent manner so that it's not always we are highly indebted? Nobody talks about where did all that borrowing go to? So my point here is that for us to ensure steady financing, if you might want to use that term, we have to begin with public finance management, prudential management of what we have. We have to convince ourselves that the little we have is efficiently being deployed, and the much we can get from those who support Africa's development initiative will also be efficiently deployed. Then we can worry about how we meet the deficit financing that we need in order to meet the rest of the development priorities that we have not been able to accomplish, if the reason for not accomplishing those are due to financing gaps. It's always assumed that the issue is about money, but is it really about resources? Or is it about resource utilization and prioritization? And you know where I'm going with this because it opens all kinds of issues about kleptocracy, corruption, illicit financial flows, and of course, the struggle for power in itself, which is always there. But when you struggle for power, it's almost as if you want to ask the question, for whom does the bell toll? Is the government in power to maximize the welfare of the citizens? Or is the government in power to cater for the needs of the elite? Is it a partisan view of government, or do we have a social welfare maximizing view of government? It's mistaken for us to assume that every government in power has the interest of the polity or the people at heart. That is an empirical question, and one that we need to confront first before you discuss the secondary issue of how those resources are used. Africa might need resources to develop, but is the government empowered to develop Africa? Those who are governing, maybe they have enough resources to achieve their goals. So the issue of deficit resource deficiency may be a matter of who is speaking, perspective. The people may not have anything, but those in power may have all they need. We have to address that issue first before you discuss the question of sustainable financing.
Exactly. How do we improve the quality of growth and create jobs?
Both the nature of growth and growth itself is a joint project between the private sector and the public sector, between the market and the state, as the saying goes. None of those partners can do it alone. We need the government to come along, and we need the markets to come along. The markets need the government to function properly. And there are certain areas of the developmental journey that the market is best equipped to deal with. So you need both a strong state, institutions that work, and markets that are free to do what they do best, which is to organize production and distribution of activities in order for us to have growth. You also need the government to be a partner in order to make sure that those factors, engines of growth, are in place to support the private sector. Remember, in your introduction, you talked about commodity booms and how uncertainties affect Africa's fortunes. The other part of that conversation is there are actually things we can do to mitigate the effect of those uncertainties. We know that commodities booms and busts are a fact of our existence. It's not the COVID is not the first time that we've had a slump in the demand for commodities. Therefore, the question becomes, how many times do you have to go through this before you put in place the necessary instruments to mitigate the ups and downs of business cycle? That comes from what we call endogenous growth rather than commodity booms. Commodity booms becomes an icing on the cake, but we have to have a plan on how Africa needs to get on a growth trajectory, booms or no booms. Those kinds of planning goes with investment in education, in health, in infrastructure, in gender equality, in technological advancement.
Mm-hmm.
The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are desert countries. They are getting into agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
hydroponic agriculture. There is nothing that the technology cannot help us to mitigate. Some of those things that are constantly an issue in Africa, by investing in appropriate technology,
Mm-hmm.
in education, we can confront those challenges that we have in the continent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that takes that long-term investment in health, maternal care,
Mm-hmm.
the health of the population, entrepreneurship, which means that there has to be a way in which the risks are socialized. You remember that in a lot of the developed countries, government invests a lot in research and development. Once they've made those advances, they disseminate the technology to the private sector. They use that in being competitive, produce the goods, and can export and sell them to the rest of the world. So you cannot say that the R&D and investment in education is a solely private sector enterprise. The state needs to get involved in that. What is the amount of research and development in tropical agriculture, in tropical diseases, in those things we consider even locusts, in drought in East Africa, in the flooding in Southern Africa, in desertification in North Africa, and even the issue of deforestation in Central Africa region? How has the thrust of research and development and the funding of universities in the different sub-regions of Africa address those sub-regional specific challenges that we face?
Mm-hmm.
Let it be that we're addressing them, but we come up short because we don't have the funding.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can tell our development partners, help us here, help us there.
Yeah.
This is where we want you to intervene with regard to malaria.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we want you to intervene with regard to trypanosomiasis,
Mm-hmm.
river blindness, and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. This is how you want you to help us with regard to desertification and the encroachment on arable and habitable lands in the area. I don't see that being the basis for discussion with our donors. It's always give us money. Let us take some loans.
Mm-hmm.
If we discuss these things, it means we've already thought out our challenges. We know where to put the money when the assistance comes. So we sit in the driver's seat, and the donors can help us get where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way in which you engineer growth. If you want the growth in agriculture or in the service sector or in the manufacturing, because you think that this is the way to address the high level of youth unemployment, because Africa is a young population demographically, then we have to have a developmental plan that is geared towards those canonical challenges in the country.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just be importing what we think is now the flavor of the decade.
Yeah.
There is an MDG, there's an SDG. This is what's happening in the West. It's service sector. What is our local plan?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't like that plan, let's have a debate about it and find out what the issues are. But you see that those are not the basis of the discussion. It's always about money. It's not about what the money is going to do, how much we are short by.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why now you see why I liked the interest in discussing financing in Africa, because it shows us that there is a meta discussion. Before that financing, there's something else that is not happening.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody wants money because money is very fungible.
Yeah.
But if you say, I want a trade school where I can train the artisans, the bricklayers, the plumbers, so we can send them to go and work in other countries, and bring in the remittances. That those things are not contracts where you can take the money. You can't take away the planing machine if you're not a carpenter. You don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
The plumbing pipes, you can't put them in the bank. So that's not bonanza for the politicians. If you bring in a master builder to come and give a lecture in a trade school. They fly them in, he talks, he goes back. There's no money coming into the corrupt officials. So they don't want those kinds of technological transfers. Yet that is what is going to give us sustainable growth. You
Mhm.
teach a man or a woman how to fish. You stop giving them fish at some point in time. But we haven't been discussing about teach me how to fish. It's always give me fish.
Give me money.
Yes.
It happens. It happens not only on a national scale, but even on an individual or a family or a community kind of scale.
Thank you.
You know, people are
Yes.
always fond of this aspect of give me the
Yes.
money,
Yes.
the actual cash.
Yes. He
And
doesn't say, pay for my school fees. I want to go to a plumbing school. Buy me
yeah,
a spanner because you cannot drink cool. You can't have cool drinks with a spanner.
exactly, exactly,
You know.
exactly.
And so he wants to come back to Uncle Anotida and say, give
Mhm.
me more money.
Mhm.
But if you buy him a toolbox, you have
Mhm.
boxed him into a corner.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that is hard work.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. That is true. If we were to look at it, at, at life before COVID in the continent, we can see that whereas some countries achieved some very good progress in terms of development and grew at a faster rate than others, that had a very strong impact on the way in which individual countries responded to the pandemic when it hit. And it will obviously influence the capacity of each and every country to recover well in this post-COVID macroeconomic environment. From your opinion, what countries should we pay particular attention to in as much as growth and recovery is concerned? And do you think that the growth of those countries, if we were to identify them, can trickle down to affect the growth of other countries that are lagging behind?
Um, well, I have I happen to have looked at the data for the last 40 years or so of Africa's growth. And in the new millennium from the 2000, there's been an uptick in growth, which then collapsed in the last decade. Those growth were commodity driven. They were not endogenous growth because there was no growth in productivity. Even when the growth was going up, factor productivity was coming down, which is very unfortunate. People were not being productive. It was just a commodity boom. The price of primary commodities went up, and more money got in. And those money, we looked at also the distribution in terms of quintiles of the population, and it's like a chokehold. It went to the wealthiest top 10 percentile of the population. In fact, it's probably the top 90%. There was no trickle down. Okay, so you can discuss growth, but if you also discuss the nature of that growth, you find out that people were COVID or no COVID, we went better off. And what has happened is that what COVID has done is that it has accelerated the issues by impoverishing those who depended on external aid. And the trajectory of the few commodity booms we were having has been depressed for a while. It has not caused a general upliftment in our productivity or those things that will put Africa on the track to achieving these sustainable development goals. All the indicators have shown that we were lagging behind. And that is unfortunate because in terms of the impact of the pandemic, we have relatively been spared. If you look at the case fatality rate, and Africa has been very lucky. It's almost magical in the impact in the terms of the number of infections and the people who have died. Conditional, of course, on the testing intensity, because our testing has also not been as large as what you have in other countries. So when you look at the number of infections uncovered, you have to normalize that by the number of the testing. But nonetheless, the absolute number of people that have fallen to the disease, at least recorded, hasn't been anything close to what we've seen outside the region. So we have been blessed in that sense. Okay. And what do we have to do post-COVID? We were never on track, if the truth be spoken. The point is now, is there any lessons we could take to make sure that we can do better than we have done in the past? There are short-term issues and there are long-term issues. And I can talk to you a little bit about the short-term concerns, and then I will talk to you about the long-term concerns. And both of these issues that I'm going to lay out to you also will improve the quality of governance if they're done. Everybody talks about getting good governance, but good governance is a function of the people. Governance does not run itself. It's the people that have to oversight the governance. We get what we deserve. If you want to have a good governance, you got to work at it. You have to get involved in political activities. People talk about they want good stuff, but when you call a rally, they don't show up. They say, I'm very busy. Who is going to show up there? Is it only the journalists and the few activists? I'm busy. I have to go to my shop. I've got to do things for my children. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. If we do not participate in civic organizations, it will be very foolhardy to expect things to happen. Part of that is despondency, because a lot of the votes don't matter. You know, there is a quote attributed to Stalin. They said, it's not, the votes don't matter because it's the people that count the votes that matter.
Exactly.
You know, so if people think that their votes don't matter, they don't bother. And if people vote with their stomach, it is good to vote for the things you care for. But if a bag of rice, if a bushel of, well, maybe several cups of rice, not even a bag, is all they need because people are so hungry. They're not voting their interest, they're voting the immediate discount. They're selling the votes because they know that this is the only time they have the politician by the barrel when he comes around. So they collect the present value of all the benefits they think they're going to get in the next 4 years. So they sell the vote for instantaneous gratification because if they don't collect it there, once they get into office, the game changes. They don't listen to you anymore until the next 4 or 5 years when it's time to go to the poll. Then they show up again with the same story. See, so as a result, people think, my opinion is, if this is the way the political process works in substance, if you want a government to be accountable, then you must give people other choices in terms of sustainability. I have to have a job that do not depend on which political party I vote for. See that? So creating growth, creating employment means finding independent middle class. That is the bastion of democracy. Unfortunately, the politicians know that. There is a quote attributed to Mobutu. I don't know if it's true. He said, don't build the roads because the tanks will roll down those roads to the State House to overthrow you. So if you empower the people, they ask for more of their government. They hold the government accountable.
That's true.
So if you have a say in that, in making the rules, you disempower. So poverty, keeping people poor becomes a means of political power and making sure that you're not held accountable. Because if you do not need my money to vote for me, then you dictate to me. And I don't want you dictating to me. So the only way I can stop you from dictating to me is to keep you beholden to me. So now you see, we've gone from financing to the quality of governance to the role of the people in that governance. And ultimately, how do you strengthen institutions? It's not by saying we need strong institutions. The way you do it practically is to empower people. The way you empower people is to, and I haven't figured this out, is how do we then create this chicken and egg how do we confront this chicken and egg problem? You need the government and the market to create a thriving society. But you need a government that is functional, not dysfunctional. So is there any way, and which probably accounts for this strong proportion of the informal sector, because people get tired of the state and they want of the formal sector and they think they can grow on their own. said, let me go and mind my own individual business.
Yeah.
But you know that when we begin to play these individual games, nobody grows.
Yeah, that's true.
We
That's
need collective action for the whole country or region to uplift. But unfortunately, we've been so balkanized that everybody's a mom and pop store. Where are the big corporations to provide the decent jobs, to provide the medical coverage, the health insurance, the pension, the sick leave, the decent jobs? So now we have this underemployment in Africa where everybody has a job, but the job cannot provide you the wherewithal to support your family. It becomes like a poverty trap. This is where we need the developmental partners to help us build stronger institutions so we can grow. This is the point Mahmoud Mamdani made after Gaddafi died. He said it should be a wake-up call for African leaders that instead of playing one international donor for the other to stay in power, we should use them to constructively help us to grow and listen to our people. This politics of divisibility and patronage politics is destructive. It's always one against the other. There is never a government that cares about, when did we ever discuss the collective destiny of the people? It's always, is it this party versus the other party? In fact, there was a friend of mine said, one of the parties says, if you join my party, instead of eating like this, you'll be eating like this.
Yeah.
Come on now.
No.
Instead of looking at your finger, you be
Yeah.
looking at your
Yeah.
If we
true.
can, and I'm speaking frankly to you here, because the development is such a serious thing that we cannot pull punches. We don't need to be very nice about what is happening. We need to find a way to move into this collective developmental space so that the resources are there. We have the people. We have a youth population ready and able to work. But you need to provide the infrastructure, electricity, water, roads, primary education, vocational and technical education. Everybody does not have to go to the university, but people need to know that when they have a skill, they can find a job as artisans, they can feed their family, and they can vote their conscience, and they can hold the city governments, the municipal government accountable. We always think in terms of the national government or federal, but what about the local governments? If you look in the Constitution, a lot of the things that improve people's life are within the list of local government and state and provincial governments in the Constitution. So local governance is just as important as federal, but because what people think about the president instead of provincial governors and municipals and cities and councils, people never discuss those issues.
Exactly.
If you think that the central government is corrupt, you should see what happens in local councils.
It begins
I
there.
lived in Africa. I know the game. I've been on both sides. So they don't fool me. Let's stop all this fancy talk about, the models and this and that. It's us, as Shakespeare said, the fault, they are Brutus. It's not ourselves that will, for we are mere underlings. We make the government, we go there to become councillors. When we get there, we forget all these discussions. And that way you say, hey, Z, what did we discuss the other time when we were under the tree? Say, forget those things. It's different now because he's in power. The same people changes.
Exactly. You raise some very important points which get me to the next question I have for you. What type and quality of human resources do we need to underpin our development aspiration?
Sometimes these things are very easy. They are low-hanging fruits. People do not need to have university degrees to become functional and productive citizens. All they need, if you can get people to secondary and technical education, and that's what they need. Solid primary education to raise the literacy rates. Then they go to secondary, vocational, and technical education to acquire skills. And then you have colleges of technologies and universities for research and development. Even when you're an engineer, it's not the engineer that builds, the engineer designs. It's the technologists and the technicians that make it happen. That four-person that is driving the crane, hoisting the things in the mega engineering, the draft that will read the blueprint. These are what happens in tertiary, some of the tertiary institutions and secondary institutions and vocational institutions. And that's where we need money. Quality of those institutions make all the difference. Remember, and if you think about this carefully, if you go to do English as a major in the university, that's not where you learn your grammar.
That's true. That is very true.
It doesn't get better than grammar school and secondary school. The English you write, even with your PhD, is underpinned by those grammars you learned in high school. That's how important. The multiplication tables, the BODMAS, the algebraic precedence, bracket of, division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. Those fundamental skills we learn about geometries, alignment of figures. You learn those things in secondary schools. That's where you get all the basic skills you need to contribute meaningfully to society. Even to be the president, you can reason properly. You remember in the old days, to become clerks in the colonial administration, all you needed was your standard school and then maybe secondary school. And if you had A levels, you were headed to Cambridge or University of London or Oxford. Advanced level was as literate as they get now. You having a PhD. They could write grammar, the English they write go back to the 60s. So it's not about, you do not need tons of degrees to make it happen. You need solidly grounded people, and that comes from proper primary education and proper secondary education. But these days you go to classrooms, you can't even find a regular chalkboard to write on. Even though the world have moved beyond the chalkboards. You can't find science teachers because nobody wants to go to rural area where there's no water, where there's no primary health care. Most of these science teachers are young people starting off life. Would you want your wife or husband to go into labor, to become sick in the middle of the night and die in childbirth because there's nobody to treat them? So this is the complementarity of development. If you want doctors in the rural area, you have to build quality schools where their children can go. Otherwise, they'd rather go sit in the city and go into private practice.
That's true.
So we talk about rural health does not exist because the infrastructure is not there. In fact, in my community, I was telling them that we need to build free accommodation with borehole and generator so that the youth corpers, in Nigeria, as you know, they have the National Youth Service Corps program. But we don't want people to go and lobby to be transferred out of our village when they post them in, because it's like going to the dungeon. We want them to be happy because they get water. Maybe they have cellular connection. They live in free house. We give them those attractives, incentives to make them come and teach those kids in the primary school and secondary schools for those 1 year when they're serving in the youth corps.
Exactly.
So, but this is what I've just given you is a little example of what the state can do in order to balance the distribution, the supply and demand for quality education, so that you do not only have to go to the big cities to find decent education. Everybody cannot live in the big city. They go there and you have urban slums. If you can create and distribute these things, if you find what you're looking for in the big cities in the village, you have electricity, whether it's through renewable energy or otherwise, then you only go into big city to go and buy your drinks from the breweries. You bring them to the village, you chill them because you have your fridge, and you live in a house like a lord because you don't have to pay rent in your homestead. And the roads are there. It doesn't have to be paved, but it has to be all-weather roads with the drainage and the culverts maintained, so that the next health center is within a couple of hours drive. You want to go at admission, you put them in the vehicle and you take them to the hospital in the big city, the teaching hospitals. And you don't have bad roads that keep causing people to change the shock absorbers and the suspension every other time, that increases the cost of transportation.
Mhm.
That's why logistics are very important.
Mhm.
These days, everybody does not need to live in the big city. Kenya, if you don't have to live in Nairobi or Kisumu or Eldoret alone, you distribute them in the rural areas. So
Mhm.
you have spatial development.
Exactly.
Farmers can have a future.
Mhm.
Children don't have to go into the big city to enjoy the big life. They can
Mhm.
watch what's your favorite musician, Hugh Masakela,
Exactly.
from their YouTube
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
village. So
Uh-huh.
they can talk the talk of the city even in the rural area.
Even in the
So
exactly.
you will
Exactly.
have urban congestion and
Mhm.
crime.
Mhm.
It's not a rocket science. You really don't need me to do this. You just need people who are willing to do the right thing. And they
That's true.
know. You don't
Mhm.
need to lecture anybody.
Mhm.
Because they take those money and they go to Switzerland and they could go to Bahamas and Cayman Islands and other
Mhm.
places where they launder the money and they stay in beautiful hotels. So they know
Mhm.
good things. I don't
Exactly.
have to educate people about what is
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
And they
definitely.
plant flowers in front of their homes,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
ministers, so they know about the good.
Thank you so much, Professor
Thank you very
Melvin
much for
Ayogu.
the opportunity.
Thank you so much for the time. Wonderful.